Let's talk about building better commander decks, and a shift in how you think that will change the way you build them forever. But not better by some random creative standards or some arbitrary deck building templates. It should be your perfect deck, based on what you want from it, and my goal is to help you draw your perfect opening hand as often as possible, and that you draw a land, a removal spell, or your win conditions exactly when you need them. But let's start with the problem I've noticed, and why I'm making this video. Because I already have 2 videos about deck building that I believe are pretty good, but the comments on my last video where I briefly talked about how many lands and other types of cards you should probably run in the average deck generated a lot of pushback, which really surprised me. There were simply far too many people unironically saying that they run 32 lands and little to no ramp. Some people even thought I was rage baiting. All I can think is that many people are either luck maxing or under the effects of all kinds of biases about their decks and how well they function. When the suggestion of running 38 lands is seen as outrageous, something is very, very wrong. Because the maths really doesn't add up, and by the end of this video, I think you're going to agree that a template is actually going to be the savior of all your commander decks. But before we talk about saving your decks and mathematical equations, we need to take a step back and look at what you want from your deck. When building your decks, you should have a very clear idea of how you want them to play out in your perfect game. Maybe you're playing Sauron the Dark Lord and you want to get him out as soon as possible so you can make Big Orc that you later yeet at people. Or maybe you're playing your famous Chair Tribal deck and your sole goal is killing at least one person in a wacky way while remaining firmly seated and using chair-based shenanigans only. Regardless of what deck you're playing, it should be built around a very specific game plan, and then have the necessary resources to both facilitate executing that plan as well as making sure your opponents don't kill you before you do. Even the wackiest and most fun decks need to operate properly so that you can do the wacky and fun things that you want to entertain the table with. With that in mind, let's look at how much of a particular resource or payoff you need in your deck so that it'll do what you want, when you want. And that means maths. Starting off with lands. Now this is going to be a little bit dry, but stick with me, because if you get this, it's going to instantly improve all of your decks, and it sets up the main course of this video. There will be exceptions based on your commander and game plan, but in the vast majority of decks, you're likely going to want to hit your land drops every turn until turn 5. Anything less, and you're probably going to start feeling the negative effects of falling behind the table. If you're still with me, then in your opening hand, you're probably going to be happy, or at least comfortable, with 3 lands, right? Mathematically, to do that reliably, you need to be running at least 42 to 43 lands. And it's at this point that I can already envision people Naruto running to the comments. But stick with me here, the faithful will be rewarded. I don't personally want to run that many lands either, and I don't. I typically aim for about 38 in the average deck. Plus, we'll get to mana rocks and ramp in a minute, but it's good to know that our correct starting point, mathematically, should be at least 42 lands. And immediately, 32 lands should be looking way more outrageous than 38. Now as we start drawing cards, our goal is to draw another 2 lands by turn 5. To keep things simple, we assume we won't thin our deck or draw additional cards outside of our draw for turn. By turn 5, that's a total of 12 cards drawn from our deck, and with 42 lands, mathematically, we should hit 5.1 lands. But again, I know that you probably don't want to run 42 lands, and in truth, you probably want 5 mana by turn 5 and not necessarily 5 lands. So let's talk about mana acceleration. Whether it's dorks, rocks, or ramp, your deck will probably want and need some mana acceleration. What and how much of it you choose will mostly be determined by your commander and your game plan. As examples, my John Benton deck wants 1 mana acceleration in any form it can get it. Dorks, rocks, enchantments, and even free mana. Because as an aggro deck, it desperately wants to get John out by turn 2 or turn 3 with protection. My Sauron deck is a pseudo-control deck, but it needs Sauron out as early as possible, so I'm running a whole heap of ramp sources to power him out hopefully by turn 4. On the flip side, my Skullbriar deck runs pretty much no ramp, because my game plan revolves around a 2 mana commander, and the average mana cost of each card in my deck is under 2. Once you know your ideal game plan, and what cards you hope you'll draw to achieve it, you can decide what kind of acceleration and how much of it you need, if any at all. Let's assume you're running a deck like either my Sauron or Ian Malcolm Dinosaur decks, and you desperately want a mana rock or ramp spell by turn 2. If we're assuming that we've drawn 9 cards by turn 2, we'll need exactly 11 copies in our deck to consistently guarantee us that ramp source.
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
If you want to ensure that you don't fuck up, you know what to do with the sub and like buttons. 80% of my regular viewers aren't subbed, and word on the street is I have to get to 100k subs to be Australia's biggest Magic creator and mega internet superstar Frog. So get it on the ground floor, and you can say that you were a member of the based Frog department before it was cool. With all this in mind, if you're running a normal mid-range commander and you're running no ramp, you probably do want 42 lands. If you're running ramp or lots of cheap draw, you can remove a land for every 2 or 3 mana ramp sources or draw sources that you add. Ultimately, I don't want to tell you how to build your deck, that's not what I'm here for, because this video is literally about giving you the tools to do it yourself. But I will say that if you're running 4 ramp spells, you may as well be running 0. Because on average, you'll need to draw 25 cards into your deck to guarantee drawing one of those ramp sources. That's in no way reliable, and it means that on average, you'll draw a ramp source by turn 4 every other game. This may sound hyperbolic, and maybe even a little confrontational if you're running 4 ramp in your deck right now, but it's really not meant to, because in almost all cases, your deck is either going to want ramp reliably, or it's not. No doubt this is going to cause even more Naruto running to the comments, but not you, because you've realized you'd rather be on the right side of history. So let's talk about all that sweet gas you actually want to draw, rather than lands or ramp. In the same way we just talked about ramp, you want to look at your removal, card advantage, win conditions, and other key components of your deck in the same way. Let's take single target interaction as an example. It's probably safe to assume that you're either going to want to stop someone from winning or protect yourself from getting taken out of the game by around turn 8 on average. To do that, you'll need to have at least 1 removal spell. If we assume you have some card draw and that you'll have drawn an extra, say, 3 cards by turn 8, this means you'll need to have 6 copies of a removal spell in your deck to likely have one by that point. But let's be real, we probably want more than a single removal spell all game. What if you want, say, 2 removal spells by that point? Well, you'd need 11 in your deck. But what if you don't want to run 6 or even 11 removal spells? That's absolutely fine, don't do it. But make that an active choice rather than an accidental one, where you randomly have 4 removal spells and are already disappointed that you never draw them. By this point, I imagine you're getting what I'm putting down, and you can likely apply this to the other types of cards in your deck. But as an example, in my Sauron deck, my game plan is flinging my Orc army at my opponents or attacking with evasion. To do this, I want to draw at least one of these win conditions by around turn 8. So I run 5, with spell doublers acting as support. My game plan involves drawing a whole lot of cards, so the math works out. In my John Benton deck, I desperately want protection spells, but especially at the start of the game, because if I connect once, I'll likely draw into more. This is why my deck has 13 cheap protection spells, so I'm almost certain to have one by turn 3. For your deck, if you know what you're trying to do and by what turn, it gets really easy to identify how many of the cards you need so that you're not getting cooked, and you're not left in a situation where you require more Vespene gas. It's at this point that I want to bring out the Naruto Runner Super Mega Bait. In my last video, I shared this as a good guideline for the average deck, and it's where I was accused of rage bait. My regular viewers will know that's not what we do here, and while there certainly are exceptions like my Skullbride deck, or an Elf deck, or a CEDH build, if we look at the most popular commanders on EDH Rec, most of these commanders and decks will reliably want to get to 5 lands by turn 5, and they most likely want mana acceleration on turns 1 or 2. And while I've literally just told you to evaluate your deck and decide what it needs, the vast majority of our decks are better off aligning with a template like this and then making minor deviations from there. Going down to 36 lands to squeeze in some extra gas is far better than squeezing down to 32 lands, especially if heavens forbid you're packing 4 mana rocks. Every time I get greedy and break my own rules, I end up regretting it and have to fix my decks later. If you're still with me, you're now staring down a graphic and thinking, man, that's like 70 cards in my deck. Does that mean I only have 30 cards left for gas? That's not even enough for all my creatures, and aren't all my decks going to look the same? Well, not at all. Trust the process, and here is why. Cards in these categories should be different in each deck. Don't get me wrong, there will of course be crossover, as any Dimir deck that wants to ramp only has access to like the same 10 mana rocks, but removal in my Sauron deck looks very different to removal in my Merrin deck, which looks very different to removal in my Aragorn Spellslinger deck, and this is true for other card categories like ramp. If you combine this with cards that do double duty and straddle multiple categories at once, you suddenly create so much room for activities within your deck. Again, using my Merrin deck as an example, a lot of my ramp or removal is strapped to creatures, meaning it's really easy to get those 10 plus numbers, and because that synergizes with my commander, it allows me to recycle that removal and ramp, making it even more powerful than if I'd simply run the best 11 ramp or removal spells in black and green. We haven't even talked about card advantage yet, so let's see how I handle that in my Merrin deck as a further example. In the same way that my ramp or removal ties to creatures, so does my card advantage, Because I use my graveyard as a resource and recur creatures, cards like Circle of Land Druid, Satyr Wayfinder, and Stitcher Supplier that put cards in my graveyard inherently act like card advantage, even more so for a card like Ripples of Undeath. Given I easily recur creatures, cards like White of the Reliquary, Braids, Fiend Artisans, DC, Birthing Pod, and Yawgmoth that sacrifice creatures all generate me card advantage. Add to this cards like Gingy, Protean Hulk, Razaketh, and Skullclamp, and I have a card advantage engine that even a blue deck would be excited about. As a final example, I'm going to compare that to my card advantage engine in my other Golgari deck, my Skullbriar deck. There, I use cards that synergize with what my deck is doing, and it has no crossover at all with my fellow Golgari deck in Merrin. Okay, so I said that a template would likely be your deck's savior, so time to make good on my promise, right? This magical savior template is one that you create when you're deck building or tweaking your deck. It requires you to know your ideal game plan, and then the types of cards you need to make that game plan work, as well as what you need to protect it or yourself. If you know all that, all you need to do is make sure that you have enough of the type of card in your deck and you're set. And I'd encourage you to play with the numbers yourself to get just the right amount. But here's some quick maths to save you time. 38 lands will mathematically ensure you hit your land drops till at least turn 4. In over 80% of commander decks, you're probably going to want that. For any other card category, whether it's ramp, removal, or win conditions, the following general guidelines should get the job done. If you want to guarantee that you have a single copy of a certain card type by turn 2, you need to run 11 of them in your deck. If you want to guarantee that you have a certain copy of a card type by turn 5, you need to run 9. And if we want to guarantee a single copy of a certain card type by turn 8, assuming we're running some card advantage by this point, you need to run 6. Obviously, if you want more copies of those cards, you need to then run more. This should give you the tools that you need to decide what types of cards your strategy needs, and then fill your deck with the required amount of them to set you up for success. A byproduct of this process means that outside of cards that do double duty, it pretty much forces you to build a streamlined deck and take out things that aren't critical. We all get a little bit greedy when wanting to add in things like pet cards or alternative win conditions, but muddying the water and cluttering up our deck won't leave space for what your deck really needs. A caveat to all of this is that if you're playing CDH, your template will look different given the meta and amount of free spells and mana, but if you're a competitive player, you probably don't need this lesson to begin with. The last thing I'd like to get across is this. It was clear to me after my last video that many, and I mean many people, must be making fundamentally flawed or biased decisions about their decks, and they are either completely unaware of it or willfully ignorant and need help regardless. There are all kinds of greedy and subjective arguments that can be made, like a free mulligan and how that's the secret sauce to running 32 lands in your Sauron deck. But those things are band-aids that should exist in an emergency and not be relied upon every time you shuffle up. Because mathematically over a bunch of games, your deck is going to let you down more often than it'll have your back. If you're enjoying this, go and watch the 2 videos linked at the end of this one. I think you'll love them. But more importantly, I think everyone should embrace a good template until you have enough knowledge to freestyle. If you already have the knowledge or already a freestyler, building your own deck building template for your specific deck guarantees that your deck will do what you want when you want it. But please, 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 run the numbers. I've linked a calculator in the description, and you can make sure your deck has enough of what it needs to do what you want, and you'll be far more likely to have that land, ramp, removal, or super sick win con exactly when you need it. I'm going to caveat all of this by saying that despite having a decent grasp of basic maths, I'm not a maths expert, I'm just a passionate frog who wants you to have better decks. But if you want to really deep dive into the maths, especially because if you disagree, I encourage you to go read the article by Magic Hall of Famer Frank Carsten that I've put in the description. While I may be smarter than your run-of-the-mill frog, I'm more than happy to admit about what I don't know, and on this topic, someone far smarter than I has run the numbers, and that's good enough for me. If you've got something to add, I'd love to discuss this in the comments, but if you narrow to run down there to argue over a few percentage points or tell me I'm crazy, I think you've missed the points this video is trying to make, and you should watch it again right meow. As always, if you've enjoyed this, yeet yourself at the sub button, but also come and hang out in the base deck department Discord. And thank you for being here.